Every few months, I like to do an episode that applies the concept of cultural maturity and the ideas of creative systems theory to a then current front page news topic. Culturally mature perspective's primary contribution lies with the big picture, with bringing long-term systemic advantage to understanding. But in just how it does this, it is often very pertinent to making sense of more immediate concerns. It puts front page news issues in context and helps us grasp what they most ultimately are asking of us. I'm going to cheat a bit on this one. When I've reflected recently on what front page news topics would be most useful to comment on, I've kept coming back to the news itself, to the news media and its success or lack of success at providing needed leadership in our time. Historically, we've turned to the news media to be a trusted agent, to supply the basic facts that we needed as citizens. And at this level, at least in the times of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite, it generally fulfilled this role. But today, the news media tends not only to fail us when it comes to the new challenge of culturally mature reporting, too often it fails at the task of informing us at all. The most obvious falling short is hardly an original observation. The way sensationalistic, if it bleeds, it leads journalism, content that appeals to the most adolescent of impulses, makes up the larger part of programming. We can miss how much this leaves us short. Very little of this kind of reporting is actually news. This in the sense of anything new, anything that could add to what people know. Arguably, its significance is a little more than that of a soap opera. This might seem obvious, but the fact that it is, and that we let it pass as news, only affirms the appropriateness of concern. Creative systems theory speaks of today's proliferation of pseudo-significance, of what, in effect, is artificial stimulation in the name of meaning. When this is what news becomes, we are left far from anything we can consider a trusted agent. A further shortcoming is not so obviously a failing, but it is important to recognize. It comes from the fact that what we call news focuses almost solely in the short term. It rarely looks out past the next news cycle, business cycle, or election cycle. Both the short term and the long term have functions, but looking only to the short term has a consequence that limits us significantly when it comes to the challenges of our time. Even if traditional reporting can get beyond sensationalistic headlines, at best it addresses immediate particulars, the what of events. If we are to address the important questions before us, while particulars are important, ultimately more important is understanding what generates the events we witness, questions of why. Yes, an incidence of gun violence happened, and rates of opioid use have skyrocketed. But knowing these things tells us nothing about why we see them, and thus contributes little, if anything, useful to finding solutions. Questions of why are what I attempt to confront here with a more big-picture vantage provided by creative systems theory and the concept of cultural maturity. It seems obvious to me that if we are to effectively address current issues, we must somehow engage them at this deeper level. We also find a more recent and particularly troubling concern. I address it in my book Perspective and Guidance for a Time of Deep Discord. Increasingly today, we find a media of the right and a media of the left. When we listen to Fox News, we know what we are going to hear. And while I could once count on the New York Times or NPR to present multiple sides, rarely today is that the case. The conservative critique of liberal media has unfortunately become largely accurate. In the book, I highlight an important recognition that points toward how what is being asked of us presents an essential new kind of challenge when it comes to such differences. Even the best of journalism in times past has stopped with the ideal of balanced reporting. But if our interest is reporting that supports culturally mature understanding, more than just this is needed. We need systemic perspective and systemic solutions. Culturally mature perspective alerts us to the fact that not only do the reflex positions of the right or the left fail us, just meeting somewhere in the middle gets us no closer. Political commentary, when it makes an effort to get beyond partisan advocacy, rarely does more than present a usual suspect from the left voicing a predictable party line, followed by similarly numbing commentary from someone from the right. But if left, right, or somewhere in between are our only options, we can be confident that not only will useful answers escape us, we will fail at asking the really important, hard questions. How often today does the news challenge us to confront the necessary hard choices before us, to address questions we might prefer to keep well at arm's length? Sometimes, but not often enough. How frequently does it require us and inspire us to see the big picture, to think long term, to take needed responsibility on our human future? Again, not nearly as often as we need. So what might a news media that again provided real leadership, that once more functioned as a trusted agent, look like? Notice in asking the question that I am starting with the assumption that means leadership for life in a world that more and more often requires culturally mature understanding and decision making. As a start, such media would not only shun sensationalism, it would take away sensationalism's appeal. It would alert us to the questions that in our time are most ultimately important, and engage us in the depth and courage of conversation that those questions require. It would also help us get beyond simple answer ideological beliefs of all sorts, those of the political right and the political left, and more. It would help us better understand the essential capacities that addressing critical questions increasingly require, and build the conceptual muscles needed to apply those capacities. And it would help us identify new human possibilities and just what succeeding with those new human possibilities might look like. The news going forward should help us not just to accept that the important questions are difficult, but also to appreciate that the greatest fulfillment and meaning lies in confronting such difficulty. It should model the courage, magnitude, and creativity of perspective our future requires. All that asks a lot, but to me, it seems a critical part of our needed new common sense. Again, your questions and thoughts are always appreciated.